I am in Stavanger in Norway because my mom has been invited to one of the strongest chess tournaments in the world, Norway Chess. Now she's surrounded by some of the best chess players in the world. I mean, in the open section, we have people such as Magnus Carlsen, Fabiana Caruana, Hikaru Nakamura. And in the female section, which is where she's playing, we have literally the best female chess players in the world. The first two rounds, my mom drew her games, and now in round number 3, she was facing the female world chess champion, Ju Wenjun. Like, literally the female world chess champion. All of these players are competing for a huge prize pool of $160,000. So the stakes are very, very, very high. And yeah, I think my mom is honestly just happy that she got invited here. She's by far the lowest rated person out of everybody participating in the female section. But nonetheless, she's been fighting like crazy, and her game against the female world chess champion was incredibly inspiring. So I hope you enjoy it. Buckle up your seatbelts and let's watch it. Now, today was an insane day because her game against Ju Wenjun was just absolutely wow. I'm gonna show it to you. I had so many emotions in this game. Like, I literally had so many emotions. I don't even think I can tell you about all the different emotions that I had. But my mom had the white pieces against Ju Wenjun, and she started with the move d4. Now, these games are classical games, but the time control is a little bit strange. They have 2 hours for the whole game, but after 40 moves, the players get a 10-second increment. This means that for the first 40 moves, there is no increment, and if you just lose all your time, then you will lose the game. So my mom started with the move d4, and Ju Wenjun played knight f6, c4, e6, and now my mom kind of thought that maybe she will enter an Indian, but instead she played the Queen's Gambit declined. This is something my dad was very proud of because he said, Anna, I knew that Ju Wenjun was going to play the Queen's Gambit declined. I knew she wouldn't enter the Indian. And he was telling me all about this because my dad is here too. Now, my mom played bishop g5, pinning the knight, and then Ju Wenjun brought out her bishop, and they were playing all of these moves in the beginning very, very quickly. I mean, they were doing these moves at tempo. It was a bullet game. Like, I entered the game around 10 minutes late, and they had made so many moves. So here my mom went rook c1 because she's trying to put her rook in the open file. And now at some point, maybe she'll take here and then she'll start putting some pressure on this pawn. So she played c6 just so that everything is nicely and protected. And then here my mom brought out her bishop. Now after taking on c4, my mom has to take again, and this is typically the idea that black waits with taking this pawn until white brings out the bishop, because then they'll say, ha, you just lost the tempo. You moved out your bishop, but you just lost the tempo, because now you're forced to take here again. So Ju Wenjun brought out the knight, castles, all of these moves are very natural, and in this position, black needs to break the center. Black needs to either play c5 or e5, with a little bit of different ideas depending on what they do. So Ju Wenjun ended up playing e5. And here, my mom, she could have played d5, she spent a little bit of time thinking, but she ended up going for this move knight e4 after a couple minutes. And the idea is that she's threatening to take this bishop, get rid of black's bishop pair, and then after that, capture this pawn. So that is what she wants to do. So here, there's not really any point in Ju Wenjun to go anything but taking on d4, because there's just so many threats against this pawn right now. So she took on d4. My mom took first the bishop, just so that black wouldn't end up being with the bishop pair, because the bishop pair is really strong and you don't want to allow your opponent to have that. And then after knight takes, she simply took back with the queen. Now this is important because if she would have taken back with the pawn, this could have led to some unpleasantries. Look at the word I'm using, because of bishop g4. Look at this. Now this knight is pinned. This knight is protecting this pawn. If Ju Wenjun is able to take this knight, after queen takes, this pawn is falling. If you have to take with the pawns get doubled. This is very unpleasant. So here you must either take with the knight or with the queen. So my mom took with the queen because she thought, okay, if we trade queens, then I am happy. My mom was playing for a draw. She wanted a draw the whole game. That was all that she wanted. She wanted to draw the female world chess champion. So bishop g4 was played here, and now there's a few different things that she can do. She could make a choice. Either she decides to trade queens, or she decides to keep the queens and play queen f4 to later bring up the rook to the d file and then activate the rooks. So my mom spent some time here making that choice, but she ended up trading queens after 12 minutes of thinking. Now the reason she's doing this is because she's playing for the draw, like I mentioned before. She wants to draw, and so she's very happy if she gets a lot of pieces traded off, and I suppose that she thought that this position wouldn't really be that easy to lose for white. So here she ended up playing knight d4, and this move at first maybe looks a little bit weird because black can simply play c5 and kick it away. But the idea is that she's going to be able to go knight b3, place the knight in a square where it's stopping the rook from entering on d2, and where she's also threatening this pawn. And now after b6, this position is completely equal. The only difference that there is basically is the fact that black has an extra pawn on the queen side, which may not seem like much, but the reason this could be good is because sometimes black can get, after trading two of these pawns for two of these pawns, black can get a passed pawn, which could lead to black having something of an edge, black being able to a little bit control the position by having a passed pawn. So this is something that's very much into the future, but something that my mom was thinking about. She's not better because of the reason that there is this 3 versus 2 on the queen side, which will matter later on in the game. So now it was very annoying that my mom couldn't play rook d1 and take the d file because of this bishop, so she went f3 and threatened the bishop. And now I was sure that we would see either bishop c8 or bishop d7, simply the bishop retreating. But here Ju Wenjun played a little bit of a shocking move. And it's not really a shocking move, but slightly shocking move. And that was bishop e6. Why is this a shocking move? Well, because after you trade, she's going to end up with this kind of weird pawn on e6. It's going to be an isolated pawn that's not defended by any other pawn. And it's going to be quite a weak pawn. And I could tell that when Ju Wenjun played this move, my mom was a little bit surprised. She was a little bit like, what is happening? So my mom ended up taking, and then she just simply played rook d1, which makes all the sense in the world, now also joining the open file. So Ju Wenjun had a few different options here. One option, she actually spent quite some time thinking here. One option was to simply trade the rooks and then play rook c8 and start playing with this pawn. This was one plan that she had here. Another plan that she had was to play rook d5 to try to start doubling up the rooks, and here it would be very important to soon start bringing in the king so that the king could protect this rook, because if black is able to take control of the d file, black is going to be better. However, she didn't do any of these moves, and instead she played this move knight d5, which is kind of a tricky move. She's threatening right now this pawn, and after king f2, she has the idea of going knight b4 and go knight d3. Now it's important that my mom doesn't make a mistake, because she's also threatening to take this pawn. So this is a little bit of a tricky situation. It's really important that my mom plays this the way she did, which is to start by trading these rooks and then go king e2. Why is this important? Because if she doesn't do this, if she goes king e2 immediately, which she has to prevent this very nasty fork, then there's this move knight takes pawn, threatening the rook, and after you go rook a1 because you want to threaten the knight and then be able to take this pawn, now Ju Wenjun would have the idea of taking the rook, and if my mom takes back with the rook, well then she's just not winning the pawn anymore, and if she takes with the king, there is knight b4, and after taking on a7, there is the move knight d3, threatening this pawn, and if now you move up the king to c2, there is check, and white loses a pawn. And even though the engine still thinks that this is around equal, this is not really something that you would want to enter without having to. So my mom traded rooks first just to not give her the option of being able to take that rook on d1. So takes king e2. Now the king is in a good spot. The rook cannot enter the knight. If the knight goes here, my mom will simply play rook d1 and ask her what is she doing. This is really not a position that black can ever win. And so instead here, she went knight takes a2, and my mom played rook a1. The knight went back, and here my mom took the pawn. She's not going to be a pawn down. Now after knight d3, my mom had a few different options. Now Ju Wenjun is threatening this pawn, and you don't want to play something like rook a2 because this is very passive, and after c4, actually there's going to be a lot of problems because if something like this, there is knight c1 check. So rook a2 isn't really an option. Here the two options that there are to counterattack. Either go rook b7 or rook a6. My mom ended up going rook a6, and now the idea was actually a very nice idea. I thought that she was going to go rook b7, threatening this pawn, with the idea that after the pawn gets defended, now she can start moving up her g and h pawns, because if knight takes b2, there's knight takes c5. If pawn takes, the knight is hanging. And I thought that my mom would play this just because it would, in a way, completely make sure that this pawn on b2 can never be taken. But my mom played rook a6 instead, threatening this pawn. Now the idea of this is very nice. It's that after the pawn gets defended, she wanted to place this knight on c4, and now if Ju Wenjun doesn't take the b2 pawn, this knight will forever go to c4, and it will be such a good knight, because b5 cannot be played as the rook is hanging. So here Ju Wenjun had to take the pawn, and now the idea was to threaten the knight, and this is so nice. The only move is for the knight to go back to d3, and now the idea was to check, and after king h7 to place the knight on c4, and my mom is actually now given up a pawn, but she's going to be getting the pawn back. You see, if the rook goes anywhere on the d file, my mom will take the b6 pawn, and well, if the rook goes here, obviously then the knight is hanging. So Ju Wenjun has to go for this check, and here my mom did the move that she would later on refer to her biggest mistake. And that was that in this check, she decided to move her king here instead of here. Now here you see just how crazy and high level this game is. So far this game had been played at 97% accuracy by both players, which is just absolutely insane. So yeah, my mom ended up playing king f2, but the reason she thought that this would have been better was because there's so many threats here, but she was scared of rook d3. She was scared of the rook coming in here and this pawn being taken with check. But what she missed was that after rook d3, and I'm going through the variations kind of fast because this is insane, the idea is that after rook takes pawn, my mom's king can go up one step, threatening the rook and threatening the knight. The only move to not lose a piece is to go rook b3, threatening the knight, so that if she takes the knight, her knight is hanging too. And now there was this move knight d7. What is the idea of this? The idea is that if, for instance, rook d3 check, and you trade rooks, this is going to be a draw after this move, this is going to be a draw after this move, threatening this pawn because there's not really any good way of defending it, because after e5, this and this, the king can simply go up to c4, and now the rook is not defended anymore by the pawn. This is so high level. But my mom missed all of this, and therefore she decided to play the move king f2. Which looked a little bit more natural because she's now defending this pawn. However, the problem became that her king would become very, very weak. So rook d3 was played anyways, my mom took the pawn, and now after check, the king went up, and you can see that now the king becomes a little bit weak. So here, Ju Wenjun played this really pretty move, which is h5, and this is a very nice move because the idea is that if something like rook c8, she wanted to play knight g1 check, and then h4, and kind of weaken all of my mom's pawns on the king side. So that was a very nice idea, and my mom actually ended up spending a lot of time after this move, and she played rook a1 after 21 minutes. This move was maybe a little bit passive, but it was one of the best moves. She had a lot of different things she could do, but it was good of her to prevent all of Ju Wenjun's plans with this. So she went rook a1. The idea is to prevent the check, and now after g5, Ju Wenjun was really pushing for the win. So my mom went rook e1, so that here the knight would be hanging. For instance, if something like rook c2, which is what happened in the game, the idea was to go knight c4, and if rook takes c4, there'd be rook takes knight, which didn't happen. So instead, Ju Wenjun played g4 check, which was not really one of the scariest moves. It was much scarier for her to bring up the king and just kind of leave the position the way it is. But she went g4 check. And now the idea is that after takes and takes, my mom cannot capture back here because then there's rook takes knight with check, which would make her lose a piece. So she had to go king h4, which she did. And now Ju Wenjun played g3. Once again, the idea is that if pawn takes g3, there is rook takes c4 with check, would lose a piece. So my mom here played the best move, which was king h3. This game has been so well played so far. They traded pawns, and now Ju Wenjun played king g6. My mom started to get really low on time here. She only had 12 minutes, and this was extremely low time with a 10-second increment. So knight d6. Here the idea is to prevent the king from coming up. If king f6 now, there is knight check, and then knight takes pawn, as if rook takes knight, there'd be rook takes e2. So instead, knight c1 was played to try to bring around the knight and help this pawn push. This is the scariest pawn. This is the pawn that I talked about a long time before. Rook f1 to prevent the king from coming in and also threaten knight e4. And then rook here. My mom just, if she can get this pawn, she can sacrifice this knight for this pawn and it's going to be a draw. So knight d3, knight e4, and now actually e5 was played, which was a nice idea to prevent her from taking this pawn. So now my mom played rook f6 check anyways. She had 4 minutes left. I was freaking out here. And then placed the rook behind the pawn. c4 was played. She didn't want to, she wanted to keep pushing the pawn. And now my mom went king h3, and the idea is simply going to be to play g4, g5, and start pushing this pawn. And it's hard actually to keep pushing this because of the fact that the knight and the rook are protecting this. So here knight b2 was played. Now my mom went knight d6. If the knight moves now, this pawn is going to be hanging. And the idea is that if c3, for instance, there's actually g4, and actually my mom can even in certain situations try to push tiny bit for the win. So here, Ju Wenjun played the move knight d1, giving up this pawn, and my mom simply traded here and went rook takes c4. Now finally, the c pawn that has been scary for so long can be taken. And Ju Wenjun now, almost immediately, made a huge blunder. She went knight takes e3. The female world chess champion had blundered the entire game here. And my mom, she had 3 minutes left on the clock. She was so set on the fact that she wanted a draw that she took the rook with literally 10 seconds. Like she took this rook in 10 seconds without thinking. And the moment she did it, she realized that she could have won the game with knight f5 check. And she was so upset. My mom was so upset. Very normally. Why is this such a winning move? Because now the idea is that this is a check. The king must move. And when the king moves, you take the knight and defend the rook. And if the king doesn't move, if you go knight takes knight, the rook is hanging. And this endgame is winning for white. So my mom here could have won the whole game. But that mistake of just taking the rook obviously made her not win the game anymore. And right after this, after they went king j3 and they drew, my mom just asked her, what happens if I go knight f5? And you could see on her face that she was so disappointed in herself for not seeing this move and winning the game. And she saw it immediately. But her brain was so focused on the draw that she just really couldn't. She didn't realize that the female world chess champion was blundering. And this is a great lesson for the fact that anybody, no matter the rating, no matter whatever title they have, they can blunder. Grandmasters are humans too. Now, in this tournament, whenever you draw, the game goes into Armageddon, which means that white must win the game and black can just simply draw to win the game. Sounds a little bit complicated, but the point is that white gets a little bit more of time, and white gets 10 minutes, black gets 7 minutes. White must win to win the game. If black draws, they win the game and get the points of winning. Sounds a little bit complicated, but that is what Armageddon is. Think about it as penalties in football. My mom had the white pieces and had to win this Armageddon game, but I could instantly tell when she sat down there and played that she was very tilted. And this game, I will show it to you very quickly, ended up with the same opening as the previous game. However, here my mom ended up playing queen d2 instead of rook c1, and she was playing this in a little bit of a strange way. It felt like she was just playing moves very quickly because she was tilted, but it somehow felt as if she was just not really over the previous game. So yeah, the opening became quite bad for her. My mom blundered a pawn here. She missed this idea of knight e5, threatening the bishop, threatening this pawn. Now after the bishop retreats, the pawn on d5 is hanging. You will see that Ju Wenjun plays this in a very not the best moves kind of way, but just in a I am absolutely going to draw this game kind of way, because that's everything that she needs to win. So this became an endgame that was already very difficult for my mom to win. I mean, how do you win this position? She tried to do some things. She brought up the rook. She tried to do some things, but here, for instance, she should just go back and forth. She cannot do this because she must win. So she ended up, kind of trying to create something. She was moving around her bishop and her rook. Takes. Here she has rook h6 check. She ended up going rook f8. To be fair, this was probably not her best game ever. But I think that the point, no matter more than anything, was the fact that this was just an extremely difficult position for her to win. So she was kind of moving around a little bit. But then after a few moves, this ended up, I mean, this eval bar is going crazy. I'm going very fast, but the point is that she drew the Armageddon game. And I think that the important game, the game that we were all coming here for, was the previous one, the classical game. So my mom drew the Armageddon game. However, she did get 2 draws against the female world chess champion, and I think she is very happy with that. The only thing that is very upsetting is the fact that she could have won that first game and that she realized it just a few seconds too late. So I was thinking that maybe we could all put a heart in the comments, and then I could show to her that, you know, no matter what, she still has hundreds of people that are supporting her and that are wishing her the very best in this tournament. So put a little heart in the comments down below if you've reached this moment of the video, and if you want to help out a little bit, I think it's going to mean a lot to her, and wish her luck for the next game. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you for round number 4.